In this lesson, we're learning about horizontal and vertical lines, and we're going to use this acronym HOI-VUX to help you remember all of the key features and the characteristics of horizontal lines and vertical lines. Let's start with HOI, H-O-Y. The H helps you remember that if you're looking at a horizontal line, you're going to be looking for some specific pieces of information. So HOI, first of all, that should remind you that the line is horizontal. So remember that horizontal means it's moving from left to right. The O stands for a 0 actually, and that means that the slope of a horizontal line is 0. Remember that slope is also the change in y over change in x. So the change in y over change in x equals 0. And the y should help you remember y-axis or y-intercept. Okay, so a horizontal line is going to cross the y-axis. In other words, it has a y-intercept. But this also can help you remember that the equation of a horizontal line is always going to be y equals whatever the number is of the y-intercept. So it's always y equals some number. So horizontal lines have a slope of 0, they cross the y-axis, and the equation is y equals whatever the y-intercept is. Now let's talk about vertical lines. So VUX can help you remember that vertical lines, remember that they go up and down. Vertical lines, instead of having a slope of 0, their slope is undefined. In other words, their change in y over change in x is undefined. And this happens because the change in x is 0. Now, if the change in x is 0, so let's think about that. If the change in x is 0, that would be the bottom part of that fraction. Well, we can never have 0 in the denominator, so that's why we get a slope that's undefined. We'll do an example to show you why this is, but that's the difference between having an undefined slope and a 0 slope. If the denominator is 0, you can't divide by 0, so it's undefined. Then you have x, the last part of VUX, helps you remember that it crosses the x-axis. And the equation is x equals whatever the x-intercept is. So the equation is always x equals a number. Now let's look at some examples to help us really get this going. So we'll call this example 1. We are going to graph x equals 2. Okay, so in order to graph x equals 2, well, what do we know about x equals 2? Well, we know that it has an x, so that should help us remember VUX. So if it's a VUX, that means it's going to cross the x-axis at whatever that number is, which is 2. So it's going to cross the x-axis, so remember your x-axis goes from left to right, so you're going to go right to 2, and this is a vertical line. So it's going to go up and down through the point 2, 0. Okay. Now, why does this have an undefined slope? Why does this have an undefined slope? So let's say we want to find the change in y over change in x. If we took 2 points from this table, let's say we take a point here and a point here, and we make a table. Okay, so if I wanted to find the rate of change here, and we'll talk more about how to find rate of change and slope and all of that from graphs later on, but for right now, let's just say we have these 2 points. So this would be the point 2, 3, and this would be the point 2, -2. Okay, so let's say we have these 2 points in our table, and we want to find the change in y over change in x. Well, our change in y, we would be going from -2 and subtracting 3, and then 2 minus 2. So if we simplify this, that would be -5 on top and 0 on the bottom. We can't have a 0 on the bottom because mathematically we cannot divide by 0. So when that happens, that's not possible. This means that it's undefined. So that's just a look into why it is undefined. Again, we're going to look at that in more detail later on, but I just wanted you to understand the difference between having a 0 slope and having an undefined slope. Okay, now let's do example number 2. All right, this one says y equals 0. So if it's a y equals, we want to think hoi because that has the y, and we're looking at where does it cross the axis, either the x-axis or the y-axis. Well, it's going to cross the y-axis because it has the y equals, and it's going to cross it at the value that's given, which is 0. Okay, so on the y-axis at 0, that's actually right at the origin. And this is a horizontal line. So that means it's going to go from left to right through that point. Okay. Now this slope, because it's horizontal, we know that hoi tells us that the slope is 0. But I want you to understand why that slope is 0. So if I pick 2 points and just make a quick table, all right, so this is the point -3, 0, and this is the point 2, 0. So -3, 0, 2, 0. My change in y over change in x. If I subtract my y's, I get 0 minus 0. If I subtract my x's, I get 2 minus -3. So that's going to give me 0 over 5. So you see the difference here. Now the 0 is on top. Mathematically, if you do 0 divided by something, then you get 0. So that's the difference, again, between 0 slope and undefined slope. We'll talk more about that later, but I just want you to understand so that you are less likely to get those mixed up. All right, example number 3. So we'll just go through these a little bit faster now and kind of get this process down. So we have x equals -3. Since that has an x, we're going to think vux. So that's a vertical line. It crosses the x-axis at -3. So on the x-axis, we're going left to -3, and that's a vertical line. Again, that slope is undefined. Okay, example 4. We have y equals 2. Y should make us think hoi, so that's going to be a horizontal line with a 0 slope that crosses the y-axis. Whoops. Crosses the y-axis at 2. So we're going to go on the y-axis. Remember, y goes up and down, so on the y-axis we're going up to 2. And this is a horizontal line, so the line that we're drawing is going from left to right. And this slope is 0. Remember, hoi, h horizontal, o 0, y equals. Example 5, we have y equals -4. So again, y, hoi, horizontal, 0 slope, y-axis. So y-axis at -4. So on the y-axis, go down to -4. Put your point, and this is a horizontal line, so it goes from left to right. And finally, example number 6. We have x equals, so we're going to think vux, V-U-X, vertical, undefined slope, x-axis. So it's going to cross the x-axis at 0. So on the x-axis, 0 means you don't move left or right at all. You're just going to stay right at the origin. Now this is an x, V-U-X tells us vertical. So that's a straight line going up and down. Okay, and that slope is undefined. And the slope from number 5 was 0.